Hi. So, Hong Kong, it wasn't supposed to be like this. The so-called umbrella revolution, yeah, that's only how the Western media call it. Chinese and local Hong Kong media even demonstrated themselves, call it a protest. So the story is that China promised Hong Kong that they get to elect their own chief executive for 2017. However, last year Beijing backpedaled and said that they have to scan the candidate first, and then they take back their promise. So students start to hit the street and to protest for full democracy. So what is the media coverage saying about the relationship between China and Hong Kong, and how do they talk about this story?
When I saw those scenes, I saw all these citizens with their fragile umbrella fighting against all these armed to the bones policemen with their large size pepper gas spray. So it's like a weak person fighting against this machine. So I was very touched, and the policemen ripped their umbrella away and tried to spray into the protesters' face, and that is unacceptable.
A lot of the protesters here are fearing the worst because as their numbers go up, they're worried that Beijing's patience is going to run out and Beijing is going to issue an order to the Beijing-appointed leader of Hong Kong to crack down. So some people are bracing themselves, and they say, interestingly enough, that even if there's more tear gas and more pepper spray, they'll still stay nonviolent and they'll push the police and appeal to their humanity and try to attain their reforms that they're looking for without fighting back.
So, tear gas and pepper spray. And thank for the media, we can also see this and this. All I can see is that the police, which symbolize the Chinese government, is playing the bad guy. And they're acting violently against those vulnerable and polite protesters who just want their full democracy. So the Chinese government totally overpowers Hong Kong. So now let's see, how did China respond to this?
Since we're apparently now living in bizarro world, you know what? There were no protests in Hong Kong over the weekend. They were just celebrating National Day. That is, when they weren't supporting the general election plan. This was from Shanghai's state-controlled Dragon TV, which handled the Occupy Central protests by airing a story about a completely different pro-Beijing protest instead.
As millions tweet and post their support for hashtag Occupy Central, those messages won't be seen in China. There's no Facebook or Twitter there, and now Beijing has reportedly blocked Instagram.
Well, so how the Chinese media talk about it is that they don't talk about it. However, the Western media tell me about it, which also implies that although China overpowers Hong Kong, the revolution still worries them, and they're afraid that it will influence and spread to other parts of China, which is what they don't want. Now let's go to an expert and see how she talks about it. Generally, the relationship between China and Hong Kong.
So typically what the American media is doing is certainly seeing it in the context of a number of different pro-democracy protests. So it tends to, I would say, probably lump them together in certain ways and seeing them under the umbrella, if you will, of pro-democracy. I'd say probably in the American media, there's not a lot of nuance in what is happening specifically between the relationship between China, Hong Kong, historical pasts. Certainly precedents like Tiananmen Square are brought up because the American media tends to use those as big examples of we want to be like America. So you don't get the full history of the region from the news, because there's reasons behind.
Then, thanks to social media, the world saw this, Umbrella Man. And people remember this, Tank Man. That image from 25 years ago in Tiananmen Square became an iconic symbol of the fight for freedom in China. The unrest in 1989 led to fierce battles in the streets, and the military killed an estimated 1,000 people.
Just as what Dr. Maxon said, these two events are compared a lot. However, we need to remember that it happened 25 years ago, and everything is different now. So now let's see how the other news talk about it.
Despite being nominally ruled by totalitarian China, Hong Kong is no stranger to public demonstration. The current unrest was preceded by weeks of student protests and planned rallies demanding China loosen its grip on Hong Kong's elections. And public outcry has even managed to affect social change in the past. 2 years ago, a proposed pro-communist education plan was withdrawn after student protesters occupied Hong Kong's government headquarters. A win for the protests could fundamentally change the relationship between China and Hong Kong.
So it brings up the education reform 2 years ago, which was led by the current unloved chief executive C.Y. Leung, and he is believed to be and called the communist puppet. So 2 years ago, the protest worked and the reform got cancelled. So is the media suggesting that the revolution this time might also make an impact? So as you can see, in general, all the Western media are standing by Hong Kong side, and they all send us the same message. They also use past events to predict what's going to happen and suggest that although the totalitarian Communist Party overpowers Hong Kong now, this revolution could change the relationship between Hong Kong and China. Thank you for watching.